Welcome to another edition of 30 Minutes of Football with Legit Football. I am your host, Brian McFadden. If you haven't caught the first two episodes, quick rundown of how we're going to do this. This is 30 minutes of unscripted, no agenda, live NFL talk. We're not going to do a whole bunch of banter. We're just going to go ahead and get into it. My guest this week, Rich Jodice, a.k.a. the Pro Football Demon. Go check him out on TikTok. Rich, welcome to 30 Minutes of Football, dude. How you doing?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on, man. Those first two episodes are phenomenal. Jimmy and Walter are like football encyclopedias. I hope I can live up to what they provided.
Well, I knew that you would be one of the first guests I had on here. You did you do a ton of fantastic TikTok videos. You're actually on live on TikTok right now, correct?
Now.
Right. So your followers are watching you, but you did a wonderful video promoting Legit Football. We will be working with you many more times to come. Thank you guys for tuning in both to his live and to our YouTube. So let's go ahead and jump in the fire. Rich, we are going to be asking each other questions. The topics, we have a vague idea, but for the most part, we don't really know which direction it's going. We pretty much know what the first topic is. You know, it's the biggest news of the day. But are you ready to get this party started?
I'm ready to roll.
Great. So 30 minutes of football with Legit Football starts now. So we're actually going to switch things up slightly in that we're going to do there's a coin toss. I'm going to try to implement an actual coin toss going forward, but we don't have the means to do that yet. So guess what, Rich? You won the coin toss. So you get to choose whether you want to ask the first question or receive the first question. What would you like to do?
I'll receive.
Okay, so we all know where this topic's going, but how I'm going to phrase this. Baker Mayfield, let's get that right off the bat. This is the direction we're going. Was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a conditional 5th round pick. The Browns ended up eating about $10.5 million of his salary, and he took a $2 million pay cut in order to join Carolina. But my question is not about the trade terms or who did better or what. My question to you is, where does this put Carolina as far as a contender? What does this elevate the Panthers enough? I personally, in my power rankings, had them, I think, bottom 4, specifically because of their quarterback situation. We can probably both agree that Baker's an upgrade. So where do you see this putting Carolina? Can they compete in the NFC South now? Your thoughts?
I think there's a possibility that they can, just because the NFC is so wide open. There aren't a ton of talented teams there. So one of these teams could sneak into the playoffs. And I did not have Carolina pegged as one of those teams, but now I think I do. The question I have is, how is Baker going to do behind that offensive line? Because PFF has them ranked as the 31st best offensive line in the league. And he's coming from playing behind a Cleveland offensive line that's phenomenal. And he struggled
Top
there.
5, that offensive line. Yeah.
So, he struggled there. And, Baker, there's this narrative out there. Well, he got hurt last year. He's better than he played. You can't really use injury as an excuse if you're deciding to play. So he made that decision to play. That kind of lies on him. And I think it speaks a lot to his maturity level also. Perhaps
recklessness as well.
Right. So perhaps it would have suited him better. He might not have even been in this whole Deshaun Watson situation if had he sat out. So he might have hurt himself there as well.
The anonymous quote from an insider at Cleveland was they wanted an adult in the quarterback room, which, yeah. Whether or not Deshaun's that adult is a whole different topic.
Right,
but you're right. His kind of antics, his kind of behavior led to the fact that Cleveland was willing to part with him in the first place.
Right. So I don't know that it moves the needle. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up is, if they do sneak into the playoffs, we have a lot of quarterbacks coming out in the draft next year. Do they go for? Who are they going to play in the first round? You have a lot of good teams that they can possibly be paired up against. If the Rams are there, which they probably will be there, so they don't make it out of the first round. So now you have one of those picks in the mid-20s, and now you're taking yourself out of the running for a quarterback. And so do you sign Darnold again? Do you sign Baker again? Now you're kind of in limbo at that point.
Right. So here's my thoughts. The talent level is actually there in Carolina. Let's assume that Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, which is a big assumption. 2 years in a row, he has missed 1 year the entire year, last year almost the entire year. And they've got DJ Moore. The offensive line is a question. They did draft Ike Ekwonu out of NC State. If he ends up being their solid left tackle, they have one good piece in Taylor Moton on the right side. So there's, they could end up being at least a league average offensive line, and they've got some great weapons on defense. Shaq Thompson had a great year. You've got Brian Burns is, I think, already one of the top 10, maybe top 5 pass rushers, even Jeremy Chin, and the corner that you drafted last year in the first round. So you've got talent. I'm not a huge believer in Matt Rule. And from an organizational standpoint, let's talk about Scott Fitterer and the GM. You were in a position to draft Justin Fields last year.
Right.
And you didn't. You couldn't have known that Baker Mayfield was going to become available this year. Everybody was talking the Browns up as possible Super Bowl contenders. They were my sleeper pick to win the Super Bowl at this time last year. So it's not like you could say this was all part of the plan. So I start to question Carolina as an organization. Yeah. Carolina, from a general manager standpoint and from a head coach standpoint, they really evaluated Darnold enough to think that he was the answer after a horrible showing in New York. Granted, he didn't have the greatest situation, but you still saw enough on tape to know that, or you should have known that Darnold wasn't the guy. Right. You pass on both Justin Fields and Mac Jones. We can say jury's still out on Justin Fields. I think he showed enough. Maybe, with Eberflus as the head coach, maybe it's a better situation. But we've all seen that Mac Jones was the best rookie quarterback last year. Doesn't mean he'll stay that way. So the point is, you had 2 viable quarterbacks, and you passed on both of them to go and be in a whole situation where you have to get Sam Darnold, or to pass on Sam Darnold and get Baker Mayfield in July, a month before training camp. So that's my biggest question. So if you're just looking at this roster on paper, it seems like, sure, they could make a run. They've got the talent to compete for the division. I don't think they would beat the Bucs, but they could at least be competitive. If these weapons stay healthy, if Baker's able to actually play up to what he's shown he is able to play at various times in his career, they could be frisky. I just don't think I believe in Carolina. I don't believe in Matt Rule, and I don't believe in this organization. Your thoughts on that?
Well, there were rumblings that Matt Rule was high on Sam Darnold in college. So then them giving up that draft capital to go after Sam Darnold, I think he thought he was the guy, that they had their problem solved.
But then that's a judgment issue, because he might have been how you play in college is very clearly not necessarily the way that you're going to be as a pro. We've seen great college prospects just completely flounder in the pros. So,
but we had, and I'm a Jets fan, so I had my finger on the pulse of that community. But there were arguments going on in chat rooms over, we need to keep Sam Darnold and use that 3rd overall pick on an offensive lineman, Penei Sewell or something. Don't move off Sam Darnold. He's got the talent. It was Adam Gase's fault. So, he might have come from that mindset. Well, Gase didn't do this guy any favors. That organization didn't do this guy any favors. So that might have been where Rule was coming from with that.
Do you have faith that this will be a successful? I asked you before if you think it could move the needle, and I think we both agree technically it could. They've got the talent to do it.
Right.
But what's your prediction? Do you think that this marriage with Baker and Carolina works?
I don't.
I don't either.
I don't. No.
I don't either. I see, even in a wide open NFC, I mean, I can't rule out them getting hot. They started 3-0 last year, but then you lose Christian McCaffrey and they all fall apart. You can't have a single non-quarterback position get injured and then your entire team fall apart. If that's the state of your team, you're in big trouble.
Right. Yeah. And again, like you said, they had that hot start last year. Everybody was saying Darnold's the guy. Oh, look at this. It was New York. It was New York. And
it was always Gase, the Gase effect, which as a Dolphins fan, the Gase effect is a real thing.
Right.
Just throw that out there.
We can agree on that.
Not giving Gase any credit. That's a real thing. But I think we know at this point now with a new surrounding that Darnold is not the guy.
Yeah.
He may not be the worst quarterback in the NFL, but he's not the guy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you look at where he was ranked in certain statistics, it's between the 40s and 50s. And there are only 32 starters in the NFL. So, you can create that argument that maybe he is the worst quarterback. I mean, in terms, I'm sure there are third stringers that are worse, but it just makes poor.
Once you're asking that question, well, I'm sure there's third stringers that are worse than this guy. Right. Nate Sudfeld is probably not as good.
Is Nathan Peterman still around?
Yeah. He is. I feel like he signed somewhere in the offseason. I just can't think of where. Right. But yeah, any other Baker stuff you want to cover now? Or do you want to move on to something different?
We can move on to something. I think we touched upon everything.
Well, the ball is yours. You can ask your question.
Okay, well, I have a fantasy football question actually, and it's a two-part question.
Sure.
Is there a guy that you are at all costs avoiding like the plague? One of these top-ranked guys that you might get as an RB2, maybe even an RB1 that you would avoid like the plague. If he's there, you think it's good value, you'd rather reach for someone else. And in turn, is there someone that you're looking at in later rounds that you think you can possibly get for free that can actually make some noise?
Yeah, so on the first part of that question, I'll give two answers. We just talked about the Panthers. I will not draft CMC unless if he falls to the second round. I mean, come on,
Right,
at
right,
that
right.
point, fine.
Yeah,
But
value.
the talent can't be understated, and he has the ability to be the overall fantasy player, not just RB1, but the overall fantasy player. He is that good. He's done it before.
Right.
But I cannot spend a first round draft pick. Like that's your one first round pick. That has to be the stalwart of your offense. I cannot pick a guy that for the last two seasons hasn't been available. I think somebody in the chat mentioned like availability is the best ability is availability.
Yes.
It's true. It's true in the NFL, and it's certainly true in fantasy, especially at the top of the draft. You can take shots on guys later in the draft that maybe have injury history because if your fifth rounder goes down, okay, that was always the time to kind of go for Deshaun Jackson. Like Deshaun Jackson was going to give you 3 to 4 weeks of like top 5 production, and then he was going to get injured for the rest of the year. But going like CMC is. And most of I think his ADP is 2, so most of the drafts he's going 2. But I'm starting to see some articles now already that, Baker's there, move CMC up to number 1. To me, that's crazy. Yeah. As far as another running back in the first round, and this has bitten me before, but I think I'm close. Derrick Henry. I don't think I can spend a first round on Derrick Henry. Yeah. I think it finally caught up to, he's just, you talk about usage. And how they are literally running him into the ground. And hey, that's what made the Titans offense click. I can't fault Vrabel for doing that. But from a fantasy perspective, this guy, I believe he's 28 years old now. He's gotten multiple seasons with 400 plus carries. It's just insane to think about in 2022 when most teams are using 2 and 3 running back rotations. And so he's never giving a ton in the pass game anyway, especially, if you're in a PPR league. So I'm avoiding him. I don't even think I would take Henry in the second. If somehow he fell to the third, I don't think I could say no. So I would say those are the two guys that I am avoiding. As far as sleeper, well, there's no such thing as a sleeper these days, but I'm probably going to try to get like a Cole Kmet at tight ends because I prefer not to spend up on tight end unless it's a sure thing. Mm-hmm. Like if I can get Kelsey or maybe Mark Andrews or Kittle, like those 3. Maybe, but even then, like I'd rather the tight end position tends to be volatile, and it tends to be one of those positions that just from year to year it's harder to predict. It's not as deep, so I would rather go after a running back or wide receiver in those first few rounds. Maybe if they're a super stud quarterback like a Herbert or an Allen, but if I can get a guy like Cole Kmet, who in Chicago, quite frankly, between him and Darnell Mooney, there's no one else to throw to. Right, and I expect the Bears to be coming from behind. I expect the Bears to have to be playing catch up. Their defense got worse. Eberflus is a defensive coach coming out of Indy, but to be determined. We haven't seen him as a head coach. We don't know how that's going to work. Justin Fields has the talent. Their offensive line was one of the worst in the NFL, and they didn't do much to improve it. So I just think that if I can get a guy like Cole Kmet in like the 7th or 8th rounds, where at that point it's basically just flyer territory, I will probably do that in a lot of my redraft leagues coming up. How about you with the same question?
Well, the guy I'm avoiding like the plague, and I was burned by him last year, is Antonio Gibson, and he's more of an RB2. But guys, I was looking at guys that you can get around the area where he's going, and you're looking at Darren Waller, you're looking at George Kittle, like you mentioned, Terry McLaurin. So he's just the guy that J.D. McKissick ate into his touches last year. They drafted Brian Robinson, and Ron Rivera has made these vague statements about holding on to the football, and we know who he's talking about. So I think if he fumbles the ball, his leash is going to be very short.
They really used McKissick a lot last year, especially towards the second half of the season. I mean, he had one game where he had like over 10 receptions. It was insane.
Yeah, it was driving me crazy because people were starting him against me.
and Gibson was a wide receiver in college. This was a guy, I was high on Gibson. Yeah. Here's a fun fact. I traded him away in like week 2 of a dynasty league last year for Cooper Kupp. basically
wow.
straight up.
Oh
That one worked out for me. I ended up in the championship game, but it was what I liked about Gibson was that he was supposed to, I mean, in a PPR league, a wide receiver who has the ability to play running back, like this guy's just going to rack up the points. But the fact that they started really using McKissick as their primary receiving back, and Gibson wasn't always even getting the goal line touches, and now they got Brian Robinson. It's like, I'm with you there. I'm also, unless it's a really good value, probably not going to be drafting Gibson either.
Yeah, and in terms of a guy that I'm super high on, he's going in the 18th round. It's Sammy Watkins. Sammy Watkins has been a fantasy superstar, week one superstar, more than once. And I know Aaron Rodgers is talking about Allen Lazard, and he had 40 receptions last season. Lazard is not a guy you want lining up against your top cornerback.
No.
So, I think it's going to be a feeling out process for Rodgers. If he sees week one, Sammy Watkins is healthy, he makes a couple splash plays, Rodgers is going to keep going to him. And he will zone in on that guy that produces and just keep targeting him. So
I think he's clearly the most talented wide receiver on that. Right. As far as we know, we've got Christian Watkins, we've got Romeo Dubes, you've got Amari Rodgers but we haven't seen any of that yet. As far as talent, Sammy Watkins is the most talented wide receiver. Mentally, that's a whole other story, but I like that. I like that as if he's available at the end of your draft, which he should be.
He's free. Yeah.
He's free. Take a flyer. There is no downside at that to taking a guy who was at the number 5 overall pick at one point.
Right. And he could return perhaps wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1 value. And if you don't believe in him after week 1 or 2, if he has those big games, trade him for something great.
I mean, wide receiver. Oh, that's halftime. We changed the halftime sound. I thought that was another 5 minutes.
That was fast.
That was fast. We're playing. We're Kansas City versus Buffalo here. This is high octane offense, and the 15 minutes goes by quickly. We'll quickly take this moment for those of you who don't know, Legit Football is a free daily NFL newsletter. Everything you need to know about the NFL in just 5 minutes a day. If you follow Rich Pro Football Demon on TikTok, you've seen his amazing video where he talks about that. So go over to legitfootball.com, hit join, 100% free, and it's just 5 minutes, and then you're off and caught up for the NFL. And while we're here as well, Rich, why don't you go ahead and plug Pro Football Demon?
Thank you. If you enjoy football takes and enjoy a laugh every now and then, check me out on Pro Football Demon on TikTok. I mix in a lot of sitcom style skits and pop culture references. So keep an eye out for those. But yeah, give me a follow.
Yeah, I am 100% a fan. I genuinely laugh out loud every single time I saw. I love the Illuminati video that just came out.
I appreciate that.
Even if you didn't do a promo with us, I would still be following you and watching these videos. So yeah, definitely check out Pro Football Demon on TikTok he's on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, but TikTok is where he does most of his stuff. All right, I'm refreshed. I did some stretching. You ready for the second half here?
Ready to roll, my friend.
Fantastic. So I will go ahead and jump into my question, and it's a question that I was going to bring up later, but I feel like we should bring it up now. I did see it in the chat, and shout out to everybody who's in the chat. I know most of them came from Rich's TikTok live, but still. And it was asking about Jimmy G. So my question is where, and it doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be before the season starts, but let's say when the season ends, what team is Jimmy Garoppolo on at the end of 2022?
At the end of 2022, wow. A lot can happen between now and then in terms of quarterbacks. I like the Saints. I'm not a Jameis believer. I can get into a whole thing about Jameis, but
we can actually. I have 4 topics written down. One of them is Jameis. So if you want to pivot into a Jameis discussion, that is fine.
Well, I mean, we can do that with Jimmy G. I'm not 100% sold that he's not going to be on the Niners next year, because we're hearing now that Trey Lance has arm fatigue. And
what does that even mean, by the way? That to me seems a little like, really? Arm fatigue, the kid's like 22?
Well, let me just say this. When the Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, they couldn't move fast enough to move off of Alex Smith and say Mahomes is our guy. Alex Smith wasn't a bad quarterback. We're seeing this, the Niners are just lagging a little bit. We're hearing these rumors of Steve Young's going to work with him. We're hearing rumors about his accuracy issues. I don't think they think he's the guy. And I don't know that they would feel safe moving off Jimmy G this season because of that. And Jimmy G has had success with them. So there could be a situation where they say, okay, we tried this, but we're going to pivot back to Jimmy G because that's what we're familiar with. That's what worked. I mean, I think Kyle Shanahan, I don't know what went on in that office, but I think he is kicking himself for not taking Mac Jones. Mac Jones would have fit that system perfectly. I think they would have moved off Jimmy G. He would do exactly what they wanted him to do. He would be efficient. So, I think if I had to guess right now, I would say he's going to be a Niner.
And this is I think a Super Bowl caliber roster.
Yes.
Outside of the quarterback position. And I'm not saying 49ers fans, we have 49ers people who watch this and listen to this because I'm a weekly guest in 49ers Rush. I'm not saying Trey Lance is not. We just don't know yet.
Right.
The rest of the roster, forgetting quarterback position, is very much a Super Bowl caliber roster.
Right.
So the 49ers know this. I mean, they were literally in the Super Bowl just a few years ago. Yeah, why trade a guy who's taken you there once already?
Right.
Unless you know that Trey is the guy. Unlike Trey is going to elevate.
And again, I think there were indicators that are showing us what they think of Trey. They could have moved off Jimmy G at any point. I know that they're saying, well, we want to get something for him. But if you know you have the guy at quarterback, if you know we have this guy, he's going to be here for 10 years minimum, and we're not going to have to worry about it. You're not worried about that. You're gonna save that salary. You're going to pay Deebo Samuel. They're not doing any of that. So to me, that's a big red flag. I don't think they think he's ready.
I have seen conflicting reports. You saw some reports that the Niners didn't believe in him and they didn't think he was ready. But then all of a sudden you started seeing a ton of praise come out. You actually put on your TikTok promo video specifically that, like, oh, you saw that Trey Lance is making some great throws in training camp. So I mean, we'll see soon enough. We'll see when he's on the field. Even if you're making great throws in training camp, until you're actually facing NFL competition against not only the NFC West, but they have to play the AFC West this year. Like, that is a juggernaut of a schedule for essentially, I mean, he's not a rookie, but a guy who's only, thrown a handful of NFL passes going up against a juggernaut of a schedule. We will find out soon enough. Let's quickly pivot into Jameis, because technically the Saints are one of the destinations. Maybe for Jimmy G. I like the spicy take of the Giants. Like, I've seen, like, what if Dayball is just like they didn't extend Daniel Jones. I like to call him Danny Duds. They didn't extend Danny Duds. And Dayball, who is known to be an offensive and quarterback guru, especially what he did with Josh Allen in Buffalo, comes in and he wants a guy that's a little more stable, that a little bit more successful, because they've got some weapons in New York. So it's like, do the Giants trade for him? So quickly, before we go to Jameis, your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a possibility? Like, and by the way, I think this is during season. I don't think this would be pre-training camp. Let's say they roll with Daniel Jones, and it's clear that he's just who we think he is. Would the Giants get a guy like Jimmy G?
Again, I think it depends on how their season's going. But I think if they're not going with, if they decide Danny's not the guy, again, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are coming out in the draft next season.
Mm-hmm. Much better draft class than this year for quarterbacks.
Right, and you're basically getting a guy for free for 4 or 5 years at that point. You don't have to pay him. You can work on other things. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking at Jimmy G, I mean, he's injured. That's always a risk.
What does he add to you?
Right, right. Yeah. So that's always going to be a risk. The thing with Jimmy G, but not to go back to the whole San Francisco thing, though, is his teammates love him. I mean, he's a guy's guy. They love hanging out with him. They never have a bad word to say about him. So I don't think he moves, but the Giants are an interesting.
I just thought that was spicy. I don't necessarily know that it'll happen. And I like your point about Daboll as a first-year head coach. Daniel Jones probably won't be the answer, but rather than bringing in another guy, like, what, you're not trying to compete, just get one of those top quarterbacks. Yeah. So now let's go ahead and pivot to the. So I want to call it Taketo Luna. Danny Dimes is the next great XFL quarterback. I have to shout out that comment. I can't argue with that. XFL starts back up in 2023. But let's talk about Jameis. That was the original question. Right. I don't believe that Jimmy would go to New Orleans. I don't think Dennis Allen. I don't think they'd want to bring on somebody else that's just a more stable. Like, why bring Jimmy G there? So they're going to roll with Jameis. You mentioned earlier you're not a Jameis truther. Expand on that.
I think Jameis just can't get out of his own head at times, and he has these flashes where he'll put up numbers, but he just makes some boneheaded decisions with the football. And at this point in his career, how do you fix that? He got hurt last year, so I guess it's not fair to say Sean Payton couldn't fix it. But I'm just not a believer. I wasn't a believer when he was in Tampa Bay. I thought they should have just rolled with Ryan Fitzpatrick and not kind of bounce back and forth. But I don't see it. I think after a certain amount of games, we kind of know who you are in the NFL.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing with Jameis.
I went to Florida State. I'm a Seminole fan, so I've been watching Jameis since college. I started to question his viability in his second year. His first year, he won a national championship.
Yeah.
But something happened when the defenses started adjusting to him, and he started throwing interceptions a lot. I guess he started as a sophomore, so it was his junior year. And that kind of carried over to the NFL. Like, that's not something that some LASIK can fix.
Right.
So, and he played much safer, much more conservative in that Saints offense. But as a result, the Saints offense wasn't very explosive. So it's like, if you take away what Jameis does best, then you don't get the high moments. You get less of the low moments, but the high moments. I'm with you. I'm not a Jameis believer. I think that the Saints will not make the playoffs, and they could be one of these teams that's in a hunt for a quarterback next year.
Absolutely.
So let's throw it back over to you. What's another question that you have for me?
Oh, okay. The best division in football, I think we could agree, is going to be the AFC West.
Hands down.
Now, I know, I think in the last episode with Walter, you mentioned you think the Chargers are going to win that division?
Yes, I do have Kansas City. I have LA and Kansas City. I believe I picked them with the same record, but I picked the Chargers with the tiebreaker.
Okay. Now, it's possible we could see all four of these teams in the playoffs. We could see the three wildcard teams. But if that doesn't happen and there's one team that's on the outside looking in, who do you think that is and why?
Raiders.
The Raiders?
Easily because of two things, their offensive line and their defense. So the strength of their defense is definitely the pass rush. Max Crosby actually was one of the best pass rushers in the entire NFL last year. I believe he led the NFL in pressure rate, which is crazy. And what did they do? They just added Chandler Jones on the other side, who is, Ngakwe's solid, but Chandler Jones is an improvement over there. So you've got a great front four. Right. But questions at linebacker, big questions at defensive back. They added Rock Ya-Sin, but maybe better than what they had, but he hasn't shown to be a stud defensive back. Jonathan Abrams, who was their first-round safety from a couple years, has pretty much shown to be a dud at this point. I believe his PFF grade kind of hovers in the 50s. So I have questions with their secondary. And if you've got secondary issues in that division going up against Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert, you've got a great offense. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But how do you slow down the other teams in your division enough to keep up? So I actually have the Raiders as the only team looking in. I've got the Broncos making it in as a wild card. I got the Chiefs as the top wild card, and I've got the Chargers winning that division. On the offensive side of the ball, I think they're going to be fun to watch. We were actually chatting before the hour live started because some guys in your TikTok live mentioned something about Derek Carr and fantasy and realism, whatever, that I'm higher on Derek Carr than a lot of people. I think you mentioned the same. Yeah. You've got one of, if not the best wide receivers in the NFL now in Devontae Adams with proven chemistry from their time together in college at Fresno State. You've got probably the best or number two, maybe behind Kupp, who's less of a slot wide receiver. We'll say one of the top two slot wide receivers in the NFL with Hunter Renfrow. And then you've got one of the top three tight ends in the league with Darren Waller. So you've got the weapons. You've got Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs. I was going to
say Kenyon Drake, yeah.
You've got weapons that can help, but the offensive line has been a question. Spending that first round draft pick on Alex Leatherwood is yet to work out. They don't really have any stalwarts. They traded away Rodney Hudson to the Cardinals 2 seasons ago, which I believe Hudson's is still a top 5 center. So it's like, there's going to be pressure issues. There's going to be protection issues. And while you might have a great defensive line, you're going to have trouble stopping these high-octane offenses in the AFC West. I have them being competitive. I have them being fun to watch from a fantasy perspective. Don't stay away. Derek Carr could be one of those guys that you get later who ends up putting up a lot of points. If their defense, like we talked about earlier with Chicago, is letting up points and they're scoring a lot of points because they have those weapons, and Derek Carr, I think, could be a top 10 quarterback, then from a fantasy perspective, he could be a steal. Nobody's drafting Carr early. Right. But as far as competing in the NFL and making a playoff spot, I have the Raiders on the outside looking in with the other 3 teams making it. How about you?
Okay, well, in terms of the in terms of the defense, rather, when you have an incredible pass rush, that helps out your secondary a lot. That can mask a lot of those secondary and back end of the defense issues. So I think their pass rush is going to help that in a lot of ways.
True, but it helps less if you're going up against quarterbacks who can make plays off platform. And who are they going up against? Well, Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, and Justin Herbert.
That was my next point, though.
Yeah,
that was my next point. I don't see Kansas City. I would see Kansas City as the team being on the outside looking in, simply because.
Ooh, that's spicy.
Well, we've never seen a division just have this influx of talent. Mm-hmm. Just all of us, 3 teams all of a sudden just got better, incredibly better.
Right.
And Kansas City didn't. Kansas City didn't get better. They lost the top playmaker. Travis Kelce is going to be 33 in October. At what point does he fall off a cliff? Now,
Anthony, put in the banner. Chiefs won't make the playoffs.
Oh, look, I mean, I'm just looking at from, this is my own logic, I guess, but Travis Kelce is going to be 33 in October.
Yep.
Well, we've been saying for the past 10 years, Tom Brady's going to fall off a ledge. He hasn't. So we just kind of stopped saying that. Could Kelce do the same thing? It's a much more physical position. So,
right.
But now you have that other playmaker that took some of the pressure off Kelce, who's gone. So teams can hone in on him in terms of the running
all
game.
Caps. Chiefs won't make playoffs. Dash Pro Football Demon. I love it.
I'm going to get a lot of hate for this, but we've also seen Mahomes struggle. Yeah. He does not have a short memory. He's not like Joe Burrow, who can get sacked 5 times and then come out and act like it didn't happen. He's not done.
We saw it against Joe Burrow. We saw it against the Bengals in the playoffs.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And that was his knock in college. He will have these stretches where he just is wildly inconsistent. And I think all 3 of those defenses are just going to be coming at him. I think the Chiefs are going to have a hard time. And if we look at their schedule, the first 8 games we have.
Oh, it's brutal. It's the worst schedule in the NFL.
My God, yeah. Cardinals, Chargers, Colts, Bucks, Raiders, Bills, 9. I mean, and then after
it's like playoff team after playoff.
Yeah,
team.
And then they still have the Broncos twice. They still have the Rams. They still have the Raiders. So this is a team that I have them pegged for 9-10 wins, but it wouldn't surprise me if in some of those shootout games they come off on the wrong end of that, and
they don't have a Tyreek to bail them out. Imagine if Tyreek's not there in the Super Bowl against the Niners to get wide open on that 4th down play.
Imagine Tyreek wasn't there against the Bills.
Yeah,
you know
true.
What I mean?
That's true.
So,
yeah. So so we've got 1 minute left. I'm going to start saying this so that people are not watching if they're just listening to the podcast. We got 1 minute left. But we had actually a report on the Chiefs backfield in Legit Football today, but there was a additional Chiefs news saying that a lot of the beat reporters saying Marquez Valdez-Scantling is the best looking wide receiver. So if MVS is the number 1 looking wide receiver for the Chiefs, that's not a good thing.
Right.
You brought on Juju, you drafted Sky Moore. If MVS is the guy you're saying looks the best, you're going to have issues. I'm not sure I agree that they won't make the playoffs, but I don't have strong feelings like, oh, you're so wrong, Rich. Like, you make a good point.
Yeah. And now we're hearing Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones might be the guy that they're going to go to in the backfield. I mean, when you're talking about Ronald Jones and MVS, they're going to be your 2 playmakers. You have to look, even with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, it just kind of, if I was a Chiefs fan, I wouldn't feel great about that. So that's kind of the perspective I try to look at it from. And again, Kelce's 30. He's going to be 33.
He's got to come down at some point.
Yeah.
Only Brady can defy time. That is it. That is the game. This was the Chiefs-Bills in my mind. This was a shootout, and I loved it. Rich, how you feeling, man?
I feel great, man. This was a lot of fun. I told you when we talked about doing this, I said it's going to go by so fast, and I feel like it went by faster than I thought it would.
And I'm gonna mention, yes, thank you, Anthony. I was about to mention Loco Monkey Sports. He put in the comments, go into 30 minutes of overtime. This conversation is phenomenal. I agree that it's phenomenal. We can't keep going. That kind of defeats the purpose of the show. However, we are 100% going to have Rich on again. Maybe Rich will do something on TikTok Live together. Maybe that can be something to keep this going. We will have you on as a regular guest. You and I have discussed that this will be a continuing partnership, and that we just think that this is such a great match between Legit Football and Pro Football Demon. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Quickly, why don't you plug your stuff again real quick?
Pro Football Demon on TikTok. Check me out on YouTube. I just want to thank you, Brian. Legit Football has been so good to me, man. You guys are phenomenal. I love what you do. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter yet, check it out. I mean, it gives me ideas for my skits, and I love that.
That's the whole reason we exist. If we can give inspiration to the Pro Football Demon, then we're doing our job.
Yes.
Thank you to everybody who's listening. Thank you to all the people who showed up to YouTube Live. As a reminder, we're going to be doing this every Tuesday and Friday live at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. When the season starts, we're going to be doing this 5 days a week, 30 minutes of football. So we're going to need spots. You're going to bet that Pro Football Demon is going to be on a lot of those, if not
Absolutely.
very, very regularly. So thanks for attending. And guys, thank you for listening and watching. This has been 30 Minutes of Football with Legit Football.